Here I have a simple scene open that contains all the appropriate elements for rendering. We have objects to be focused on and illuminated. We have a lamp to provide the direct illumination, along with a world environment map, which I can enable in the viewport in our display dropdown, world background. This will provide additional illumination for our scene. And then finally, a camera object, which I can look through by hitting the 0 key on the number pad or coming down to the view menu, cameras, active camera. And so I'm ready to kick off a render, which I can do with this button here in the render properties all the way at the top, which is appropriately labeled render. So I'll click that. You'll see a new window appears and the render will commence. And this result is from whatever render engine we have activated, which can be chosen up here at the top. As you can see, I have Cycles Render enabled. And if I click on that, we get a list of all the engines that are available to us. And as for this window that has appeared, you can see down here in the bottom left corner that this is in fact the UV image editor, which is a multi-purpose window. We can have access to all of the images that are loaded in our scene. Here I have a Gizmo reflection texture or normal texture for us to also edit the UVs of a mesh object. And now you know that we can also see our render results here. And so the navigation is pretty intuitive and consistent between editors. If I hit Control and middle mouse drag, we can zoom in and out. Just middle mouse dragging allows us to pan the image. And then also we can zoom in and out with the scroll wheel. Also for specific zooming, I can hit 1 on the number pad, which will take us to the full resolution of the render. I can hit 2 to go to half, 4 to see 1/4 of the resolution, and then holding Control and 2 takes it to twice the resolution, Control 4 times the resolution. And all these are also accessible in the view menu here. More often than not, I just want to see the original resolution. And then for our render results, we have slots here, a total of 8 slots, which is valuable for quickly comparing renders. So let's say I switch to slot number 2 and then choose my area lamp from the outliner up here. And let's change the color of it to blue and then kick off another render, which in addition to selecting the button in our properties panel, I can also come up here to the render menu at the top and choose render image or F12 as the hotkey. And since I rendered this with slot 2 enabled, I can switch back to slot 1 to see a comparison, or use the Alt-J hotkey to go down a slot and then J to go up a slot. And as you can imagine, this is very useful for comparing tweaks that I make throughout the rendering workflow. Beside that, we have render layers, which if I had multiple layers, this is where we could select each specific render layer. By default, I just have the one. And then to the right, we have combined, which is one of our render passes. By default, we only have the combined and then the depth pass. To the right of that, we have the channels for each pass. So this is the color and alpha together. If there was transparency anywhere in the image, that would be visible here. Then to the right, we have just the color, ignoring the alpha. And next, the actual black and white alpha information, which since there is no transparency, it's just pure white. And then finally, if the image has a Z buffer, that channel is available as well. And so each time you kick off a render, the UV image editor will automatically appear so that you can see your render result. Once we're done and ready to go back to editing, we can hit Escape, which will take us to the previous UI layout. More often than not, when you click render, it will take whatever 3D viewport is active and make that the UV image editor. But if this were the node editor, for example, and we were tweaking our material settings, clicking render would take over that node editor window. Now, in addition to seeing this rendered result in the UV image editor, Blender also offers the ability to see a rendered result in the 3D viewport. And that can be enabled here in our viewport shading options. All the way at the top, rendered. The hotkey for this is Shift-Z. And you can see that right here in the viewport, we get a render result that is progressively refining, at least up until the limit that we set, which by default is set to 10 samples. The sampling we will get to later, but our viewport rendering is extremely valuable because it respects each setting that is tweaked. For example, if we go back to our light and change the color to green, it updates almost in real time. We can drop our strength down a little bit. Here at 0, we just see the HDRI illumination. We can move our objects around in the scene. And again, all of this in near real time. The speed of this viewport rendering is dependent on your machine, just like the speed of rendering in general. And so if you have a very powerful CPU or especially a GPU, the rendered viewport can be very fast. We can also hit Control-Z in the viewport, which I don't recommend because as you can see, the render has to restart. Whereas changing settings can be done real time, the render can continue to progress, but hitting Control Z requires the BVH to be rebuilt, which I have seen crash Blender occasionally. So each time I hit Control Z and it restarts, I get a little more worried that it's going to crash on me, but perhaps it's a little more stable now. So that is kind of an introduction to Blender's general rendering behavior. Next we will start to get into the render settings.